The locker room door opens 45 minutes before the fight. 3 men in expensive suits walk in without knocking. No permission. No apology. Just power. The biggest one, a man everyone in boxing knows by reputation if not by name, sits down across from Muhammad Ali and says 5 words that would have terrified most fighters. "You're going to lose tonight." But Muhammad Ali isn't most fighters, and what happens in the next 10 minutes won't just save his integrity. It will prove that some men can't be bought, can't be threatened, and can't be controlled. This is the true story of the night Muhammad Ali faced organized crime and won without throwing a single punch. Muhammad Ali had recently returned to boxing after his 3-year exile for refusing military service in Vietnam. The Supreme Court had overturned his conviction, and Ali was fighting his way back to the heavyweight championship. But he'd lost his first attempt to reclaim the title, falling to Joe Frazier in the fight of the century just months earlier. Now Ali was scheduled to fight a lesser opponent in a tune-up bout designed to rebuild his confidence and his ranking. The opponent's name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that certain people with connections to organized crime had bet heavily against Ali, not because they thought he would lose, but because they'd made sure he would lose, or at least they thought they had. The problem was nobody had bothered to ask Muhammad Ali if he was willing to participate in their plan. When the 3 men walked into Ali's locker room, Angelo Dundee, Ali's trainer, immediately stood up. "This is a closed locker room," Dundee said, his voice firm but controlled. "Nobody's supposed to be in here before a fight." The biggest of the 3 men smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knows the rules don't apply to him. "We're not nobody," he said, his voice carrying the casual menace of a man who's never been told no. "We're friends of the sport, friends who make sure things run smoothly. We just want to have a conversation with the champ." Ali, who'd been lying on the training table getting a rub-down, sat up slowly. He recognized the type immediately. Ali had been around boxing his entire adult life. He knew that organized crime had its fingers in the sport, had for decades, fixed fights, controlled rankings, owned fighters. It was an open secret that nobody talked about publicly because talking about it could get you hurt or killed. "What kind of conversation?" Ali asked, his voice calm. The man sat down, crossed his legs, made himself comfortable like he owned the place. His 2 associates moved to stand by the door, blocking the exit. The message was clear. Nobody was leaving until this conversation was finished. "The kind where we make sure everybody benefits," the man said. "See, champ, you're a smart guy. You understand business, and this fight tonight, it's business. Good business for everyone if it goes the right way." Ali knew exactly what the man meant. He'd heard stories about fighters being approached before bouts, being told to take a dive in a specific round, being promised money or threatened with violence. Some fighters took the deals, others refused and paid the price. A few refused and nothing happened because their refusal became public and the mob didn't want that kind of attention. "What's the right way?" Ali asked, playing dumb but knowing every word was important. The man smiled again, confident. "The right way is your opponent wins tonight. Maybe round 7, round 8. You take some shots. You go down. You don't get up. You get your purse. You get to walk out healthy. And everybody who bet on your opponent makes money, including us, including you, if you're smart." He named a figure. It was substantial. More than Ali's purse for the fight, though nowhere near what Ali made on his biggest bouts. Tax-free, cash, untraceable. All you have to do is take a nap in round 8. There was silence in the locker room. The 2 associates by the door watched Ali carefully, reading his body language for signs of resistance. Angelo Dundee looked like he wanted to say something but knew better. This was Ali's decision, and whatever Ali decided, Dundee would have to live with. The man waited, confident in his proposal. In his experience, fighters always took the deal. The money was good. The alternative was bad. Nobody wanted to be the hero. Heroes got hurt. But here's what the mobster didn't understand about Muhammad Ali. Here's what separated Ali from every other fighter who'd sat in that same position and said yes. Muhammad Ali had already fought a war that made this confrontation look like a playground argument. 3.5 years earlier, Ali had been the heavyweight champion of the world, undefeated, at the absolute peak of his powers, and the United States government had asked him to do something he didn't want to do. Step forward, accept induction into the armed forces, go fight in Vietnam. Ali had said no, not quietly, not diplomatically, publicly, defiantly. I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong, he declared to a room full of journalists. No Viet Cong ever called me nigger. The government had responded by stripping his championship, taking his boxing license, banning him from the sport, threatening him with 5 years in federal prison. They'd tried to break him financially, professionally, legally. The most powerful government in the world had tried to force Muhammad Ali to compromise his principle. And Ali had looked at all that power, all that pressure, all those threats, and he'd said one word: no. He'd been willing to go to jail, willing to give up millions of dollars, willing to sacrifice his career, because some things matter more than money. Some things matter more than being safe. Some things you don't compromise on, no matter who's asking. Muhammad Ali stood up from the training table. At 6'3", he towered over the seated mobster, and when he spoke his voice was calm, almost conversational, but every word carried weight. Let me ask you something, Ali said. You know who I am? The man laughed, surprised by the question. Of course I know who you are. You're Muhammad Ali, former heavyweight champion. That's why we're here, because you're famous, and when famous people lose, lots of money changes hands. Ali nodded slowly. That's right, I'm Muhammad Ali. I'm the man who gave up 3.5 years of my career, 3.5 years of my prime, because I wouldn't compromise what I believe in. The man's smile faded slightly. He sensed this wasn't going the way he'd expected. Ali took a step closer. The United States government, the most powerful government in the world, tried to make me do something I didn't want to do. They stripped my title. They took my license. They threatened me with 5 years in prison. And you know what I told them? The room was completely silent now. I told them no. I told the President of the United States, the Supreme Court, the U.S. military, all of them. I told them no. I was willing to go to jail. I was willing to give up millions of dollars. I was willing to give up my career, because some things matter more than money. Some things matter more than being safe. Some things you don't compromise on, no matter who's asking. Ali leaned down so he was at eye level with the seated mobster. Now I don't know your name. I don't know who you work for, but I know you're not the president. You're not the Supreme Court. You're not the U.S. military. You're just a guy in a nice suit, asking me to do something I don't want to do, and you think I'm going to say yes to you when I said no to them? The man's face had gone hard. The smile was completely gone now. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. Fighters were supposed to be afraid. Fighters were supposed to understand the implicit threat. Fighters were supposed to take the money and do what they were told. You don't understand the situation you're in, the man said quietly, and his voice had changed. There was no more pretense of friendliness. This isn't the government. This isn't lawyers and courtrooms. This is different. People who say no to us, they have accidents. They have problems. Their families have problems. Is that a threat? Ali asked. His voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. Because if you're threatening me, you better understand something. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of your friends. I'm not afraid of your organization. You know why? Because I've been threatened by X. And then Muhammad Ali said the words that would end this confrontation and create a legend that would be whispered about in boxing circles for decades. I've been threatened by the FBI. I've been threatened by the U.S. government. I've had death threats from the Ku Klux Klan. I've had Nation of Islam members tell me they'd kill me for leaving the organization. And I'm still here, still standing, still fighting. You think you scare me? I've fought Sonny Liston, and Liston was scarier than you'll ever be. I've stood up to a government that wanted to put me in prison. I've walked away from millions of dollars because I wouldn't compromise my principles. And you think I'm going to throw a fight because you showed up in my locker room with 2 guys and some threats? The man stood up now, his face flushed with anger and something else, uncertainty. He wasn't used to being talked to like this. In his world, when he made these kinds of visits, people said yes. They were afraid. They took the money. They did what they were told. But Ali wasn't afraid. and the man could see it in his eyes. This wasn't an act. This wasn't bravado. Ali genuinely didn't care about the threat. "You're making a mistake," the man said, and his voice had lost its conviction. Ali shook his head. "No, you're making a mistake. You walked into the wrong locker room. You tried to buy the wrong fighter. I don't work for you. I don't work for the mob. I don't work for anybody except myself and Allah, and neither one of us is telling me to lose this fight." Then Ali did something that would prove to be genius. He didn't just refuse. He turned the entire situation around. He made the mobster understand that threatening Muhammad Ali was different than threatening other fighters. "Let me tell you what's going to happen," Ali said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, but somehow becoming more powerful. "You're going to walk out of this locker room right now. You're going to go back to whoever sent you, and you're going to tell them that Muhammad Ali said no. You're going to tell them that they bet on the wrong horse, and you're going to tell them that if they ever send anyone into my locker room again, I won't just say no, I'll make it very public." The threat landed. The man's eyes widened slightly. "I'll call a press conference," Ali continued. "I'll tell the whole world that the mob tried to fix my fight. I'll name names. I'll give details. And then where will you be? You think the heat is bad now? Wait until Muhammad Ali goes on national television and talks about how organized crime is fixing boxing matches. There'll be investigations, congressional hearings, media firestorms. The FBI will be so far up your operation you'll never get them out. The heat will be unbearable." "You wouldn't," the man said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ali smiled for the first time, and it was genuine. "Try me. I went to war with the US government and won. You think I'm afraid to go to war with you? I've got nothing to lose. I've already lost everything once and came back. But you've got a lot to lose. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to leave now, and we're never going to have this conversation again, because if we do, I promise you, the whole world is going to hear about it." Angelo Dundee had moved to stand beside Ali. Two more of Ali's team had appeared in the doorway behind the mobsters, drawn by the raised voices. The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. The man looked at Ali for a long moment, calculation in his eyes. Finally he nodded slightly. It might have been respect. It might have been admission of defeat. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met," the man said quietly, "or the stupidest." Ali's smile widened. "I've been called both. Usually I'm both at the same time, but I'm always honest, and I always keep my word. So when I tell you I'll go public if this happens again, you'd better believe me." The man adjusted his jacket, signaled to his associates. As they moved toward the door, he stopped and looked back at Ali one final time. "For what it's worth," he said, and there was no irony in his voice, "I hope you win tonight." Then the three men were gone. The door closed behind them. Angelo Dundee let out a breath he'd been holding. "Do you know what you just did?" he asked. Ali shrugged and lay back down on the training table like nothing had happened. "I just told some guy I'm not going to throw a fight. Same thing I've been telling people my whole life. Nobody owns me. Nobody controls me. Not the government. Not the mob. No, they could come back," Dundee said, his voice worried. "They could wait for you outside. They could." Ali cut him off. "They won't. You know why? Because I meant what I said. If anything happens to me, everyone will know who did it, and the mob doesn't want that kind of attention. They're businessmen. Bad business is when everyone's looking at you. They'll leave me alone." That night, Muhammad Ali went out and destroyed his opponent. It wasn't close. It wasn't competitive. Ali boxed brilliantly, moving with the speed and precision that had made him famous, landing combinations at will. In the 8th round, ironically the same round where he'd been told to take his dive, Ali knocked the man out cold. After the fight, a reporter asked Ali if he'd had any trouble preparing for the bout. "No trouble at all," Ali said, smiling. "Just had to remind some people who I am, and what I stand for." The story of the mob visit to Ali's locker room didn't become public for years. Those who were there kept quiet, partly out of respect for Ali, partly out of fear of what might happen if they talked. But eventually, as these stories always do, it leaked out. Angelo Dundee confirmed it in interviews late in his life. Others who were there, whose names are still sometimes kept private, corroborated the details.
What makes the story remarkable isn't just that Ali refused the mob's demand. Other fighters had refused before, though not many. What makes it remarkable is how Ali refused. He didn't just say no. He turned the tables completely. He made the mobster understand that threatening Muhammad Ali wasn't like threatening other fighters. Ali had already proven he couldn't be intimidated by anyone, including the most powerful government on earth. Why would he be intimidated by the mob? There's a lesson in that moment in the locker room that goes beyond boxing and beyond organized crime. It's about knowing who you are. It's about having principles that you won't compromise, no matter who's asking you to compromise them. Muhammad Ali had drawn his lines years earlier when he refused military service. Once you've given up millions of dollars and risked prison for your beliefs, once you've stood up to that kind of pressure, nothing else can move you. The mob represented everything Ali had fought against his entire life: corruption, intimidation, the idea that everything and everyone has a price. By refusing their demand, by threatening to expose them publicly, Ali proved something that transcended sport. He proved that integrity isn't just a word, it's a choice you make in moments when it's difficult, when it's dangerous, when it would be so much easier to just go along. But here's the part of the story that makes it eternal, the part that connects it to the larger arc of Muhammad Ali's life. Years later, when Parkinson's disease began to slowly take away Ali's physical power, when his hands started to shake and his speech became labored and his body began to betray him, people would look at him and see tragedy. They'd see the greatest fighter who ever lived reduced to trembling and silence. But they were looking at it wrong. The Parkinson's didn't diminish Ali, it revealed what had always been there underneath the speed and the power and the beautiful violence. It revealed that Muhammad Ali's true strength was never in his fists. It was in his refusal to be broken by anyone or anything. The US government couldn't break him, the mob couldn't break him, and Parkinson's disease, for all the damage it did to his body, couldn't break his spirit either. When Ali lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta in 1996, his hands shaking so violently that billions of people watching thought he might drop it, what the world saw was the same man who'd stood in that locker room a man who refused to quit, a man who couldn't be intimidated, a man whose conviction was stronger than any force that opposed him. The trembling arm that raised that torch was making the same statement Ali had made to the mob 25 years earlier. You can threaten me, you can hurt me, you can take away my title, my license, my health, but you cannot make me compromise who I am. Muhammad Ali passed away in 2016, his body finally surrendering to the disease that had stalked him for 3 decades. But the lesson of that locker room confrontation lives on every time an athlete uses their platform to stand up to injustice instead of staying quiet for endorsements. It lives on every time someone chooses principle over profit. It lives on every time a person looks at power and says the one word that power can't tolerate: no. The mob learned that night what the US government had learned years before. Muhammad Ali couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be controlled. You could strip his title, take his license, threaten him with prison, show up with muscle and veiled threats. None of it mattered. Ali was going to do what Ali believed was right. Consequences be damned. That's what made him the greatest. Not just his skill in the ring, though that was extraordinary. Not just his speed and power and intelligence as a fighter, though all of that was world-class. What made Ali the greatest was his absolute refusal to compromise who he was for anyone. The mob learned that lesson the hard way in a locker room 45 minutes before a fight, when they walked in thinking they were going to buy a fighter, and walked out having met a man who couldn't be bought at any price. If this story of courage and integrity moved you, remember this. We all face moments when power tells us to compromise, when money says to look the other way, when fear says to just go along. Muhammad Ali showed us that the answer to those moments isn't found in your fists or your fame. It's found in knowing who you are and refusing to be anyone else, no matter what it costs. Your principles, your integrity, your self-respect, these aren't negotiable, not for money, not for safety, not for anyone. Muhammad Ali knew that, and on that night in 1971 he taught it to 3 men in expensive suits, who thought everyone had a price. They were wrong, and they never came back.